Hi, I'm Vojtech from Index Ventures, a global venture capital firm that has for the past 25 years been supporting the most ambitious entrepreneurs all across Europe. And today, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our first startup policy event, which we are co-hosting with Slush. Over the next 2 days, we are going to explore what it would take for Europe to become the most entrepreneurial continent. Not Optional started as a startup initiative founded by Index alongside 500 CEOs and founders who called on European governments to reform the punitive policies that govern stock options. And we have made great progress on that front. However, this Thursday and Friday, we're going to look beyond stock options and look at other measures, other practical steps that Europe must take to become the best place to start and build world-changing businesses. The virtual format of this event allows us for the first time to bring together key national and EU policymakers with startup executives, CEOs, and founders at a critical juncture for European tech and Europe as a continent. We believe this is incredibly important with our friends at Slush. And with that, I'll pass it on to the CEO of Slush. Miika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vojtech, and welcome on my behalf as well, and also on Slush behalf. Slush is all about helping the next generation founders forward. And we believe that to reach the next level in the European startup ecosystem, we have to work together with founders, investors, and also policymakers. And this event is actually all about it. So event will be going on today until 5:45 Central European Time. And tomorrow we're going to start again 9:30 a.m. Central European Time. So the program is backed by critical stakeholders from the European scene, like John Collison, co-founder and president from Stripe, Sion Keen, chief people officer from Farfetch, David Hinderkus, co-founder and chairman of TransferWise, Eva Kaili, member of European Parliament, and many, many other incredible speakers. And we'll be talking about and doing deep dives how we are actually doing right now, whether it's data or by some of the best professionals in the industry. We're going to discuss stock options, talent attraction, European IPOs, and much more. But I think it's time to move on to the first discussion, the opening fireside. And let's start with introducing our panelists. Our first guest is Neil Rimer, founder of Index Ventures. And Neil is often called the European startup backer and also considered as the godfather of European venture capital space. Neil founded Index in Geneva 1996. And today, Index is one of the most prominent venture capital funds in the world, backing companies like Supercell to Adyen to Farfetch, and also in the US soil, companies like Dropbox and Slack. Earlier this year, Index raised $2 billion to support the next generation founders, and also Neil serves as the co-chair of Human Rights Watch, non-profit and non-governmental organization tackling human rights issues around the world. That's Neil. In addition, we have Constantijn van Oranje, special envoy at Techleap.nl and ex-head of cabinet at the European Commission. And at European Commission, he served first as an advisor, later as deputy private secretary, and private secretary to the vice president of the European Commission and commissioner of the digital agenda. He has been also a member of high-level group of innovators, and famously has said, "Does anyone know more important to focus on than tech?" So welcome, Neil and Constantijn.
Thank you.
So we have 20 minutes, so let's start right away and shift gears a bit. So I want to start talking about the macro perspective of the European startup and tech ecosystem. And in the end, we're here to discuss how to make Europe the most entrepreneurial continent. So what's your assessment of where Europe is actually today in terms of startups, venture capital, and technology? And what if we start with you, Neil?
Thanks, Miika. I first want to correct the record and say I'm one of the founders. There are three of us who are founders, and I don't want to be hogging all the glory from my partners. I think that when I think of where we are today, it's almost beyond what we might have imagined 10 years ago. To imagine that in 2020, you'd have not one, but two European companies that trade at valuations above or around $50 billion. And valuation is one metric. I think of it as a proxy for how ubiquitous your product is, how indispensable your product is. And the world awards you that kind of evaluation. But to think of the fact that we're at that place, that the number of people working in startups around Europe is growing dramatically and is over 2 million people now across Europe, and that's 40% more than it was just in 2016. That the jobs that are being created by startups are now starting to make a significant dent in the economy. That would have been really hard to imagine 10 years ago. But I'd say we're also just at the beginning of where we're going to be 10 years from now.
Got it. Constantijn, do you share the view of Neil? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I do. I must say I share less the amazement. I think this has been developing for quite a while, and more and more funding has been available over time, and we've seen bigger companies and more unicorns emerging from Europe. I do think it's still vulnerable in a sense that there's still a lot of public money in the system, and the connectivity of Europe is still not very high. So do we really see entrepreneurs go back and become venture capitalists? Do we see governments really interacting with these new types of companies? Do we see that governments fully understand how important this is? I think there's still quite a lot to be done. But on the whole, I'm really proud what's being achieved. And when we set up we first wrote the Startup Manifesto for Europe and set up the Digital Leaders Club with founders of Skype and of Spotify and others. Then when we're really looking for role models in Europe now, I think there are sufficient role models, and these are really becoming very serious companies. And I think now we're not talking about startups anymore, but about a very sophisticated tech sector that is now proving to larger parts of the economy that this is very serious, that these are the jobs of the future, and that these are the companies that will keep us competitive. And then the last point, I think COVID has really helped us bring forward a lot of these developments. Everything becoming remote, from education to healthcare to work. A lot of these innovations were already there, but they were not implemented. And now COVID has really accelerated that process.
Got it. You mentioned, Constantijn, about role of governments, and let's come back to that in a second. But before that, maybe I'm curious to understand, like, if we think about the past 20 years, or let's say 10 years, what have been the biggest changes, whether they are good or bad, you have witnessed when you both have worked with startups for many, many years? Maybe, Constantijn, if you can start.
On the government side, I think, when we did the digital agenda, it was seen as a vertical. Like you had electricity or energy, and you had telecoms and transport, and we tried to say this is transversal. It's going to be transformational to all sectors of the economy, of society, and that was just not generally accepted. I think that's now generally accepted. It's now accepted that this is highly strategic, and we might come back to that as well, between the US and China and Europe. In many parts of the world, the IT infrastructure and services on top, the platforms are highly strategic, and that was not the case 5 to 10 years ago. So a lot of that has changed. I think there's a different degree of ambition among governments to support the whole tech system and startup ecosystems. It's been remarkable what the UK has done under Prime Minister Cameron, but also before, and how it has been a bit of an innovation laggard, and now is a leader in venture capital and in tech, but also incredible progress in the Scandinavian countries, in France with Macron being really ambitious and and pumping a lot of money, but also political support into this. And also in my own country, how Amsterdam and many other hotspots in the Netherlands have really embraced tech and have become one of the most important tech hubs in Europe.
Got it. Neil, what is your experience of 25 years of investing to the companies? Like, what are the good and bad changes of working with startups?
I can't really think of too many bad ones, Miika. I can tell you that the level of ambition of entrepreneurs has just ratcheted up every year. And that's not just up to them, it's also the people around them, the teams, but also the investors backing them. There's a level of trust with a growing, an increasingly sophisticated group of investors investing in these companies that convinces management to keep going for a bigger outcome, and management convinces investors that they can go for a bigger outcome. It's kind of this self-reinforcing cycle, but also the flow of talent into these companies out of great companies. 20 years ago, it was really hard to attract people out of career paths at big companies. Today, this is seen as kind of the ideal career path. So the mobility of talent, also geographically, the mobility of talent across Europe, people don't ask questions about moving to Helsinki or moving to Berlin or moving to Barcelona, and remote work obviously helps that. And finally, I'd say the fact that the rest of the world, including the US, investors, public markets, analysts have all discovered European companies and realized that, these companies like that have been mentioned, Skype or Spotify or Adyen, actually emerged from this place called Europe. Who'd have thought that?
Yeah. I want you. Those are great points, and also like what Constantijn mentioned early on about governments and maybe the varying role and maybe ambition level what different governments have and what different countries have. Constantijn mentioned UK, France, Netherlands, and I want to actually talk about like role of governments and policymakers backing the European startup ecosystem and tech ecosystem. So my question is, why is it important, or what is your message? Why is it important for to understand that startups are a strategic priority? And is this like nice to have thing? Is it must to have thing? And how far do you think that we are from that it's actually strategic priority if it's not yet? Maybe Constantijn, if you want to start.
Well, I think you should not look at it as startups. I think it's about technology, and do you want to be involved in the development of technology? And then of course the startups are the companies that bring the technology to the market, and then they create new markets and all that. So that is important in terms of jobs and etc. But your competitiveness, the competitiveness of your economy, depends really if you are on trend with many of these developments. And if you look at where the big transitions are going in terms of the energy transition, food transition, the digital transition, if you're not part of that, if you don't have deep capabilities in AI, and if you're looking forward in, for instance, quantum computing, then you'll miss out. And it's not just about startups, but it's your economy will miss out. And if you don't play in that global game, then the relevance of your country and your autonomy and your sovereignty will be less. So in that sense, it's extremely strategic. The good thing is actually, if you look at countries like Singapore or Israel, but also some European countries, there's actually quite simple things you can do as long as there's a good base. And I think many of our countries have a strong base in science and have relatively stable political environments and economies that can actually support these companies here, and so you need, with some fiscal measures, you need to have open migratory system where you invite talented people to come to your countries. Obviously, you can do a lot in education, but none of this is rocket science. And many of the countries that have been successful have demonstrated what is possible. So basically, if you look around and copy creatively, then countries within I would say a window of 10 years can go from relatively backward to even front runners in this game. But I do think there's now an inflection point where many of those technologies are hitting an exponential curve. So if you miss out now, I think you might miss out for the longer run as well. And therefore, it's really important to be on top of this.
Got it. Neil, do you think that policymakers are willing to change, willing to make the change that you feel is necessary? And kind of like, what is your take on this? Like, is this enough big deal for everyone?
Yeah, I think like any, enterprise, you need a strategy, and a strategy is about keeping the main thing, focusing on the number one priority at the cost of all other things. And I think some countries have been forced to figure that out early. Finland, Estonia, Constantijn mentioned Israel, Ireland, for whatever reason, their experience, cycles that they've been through, they've realized, this is the way forward. There are not 5 ways forward. This is not one of 3 things we should be doing. This is the main thing. And maybe somebody else has a better idea, but as far as I know, there is no better way to dynamize an economy. And the good news is that beyond recognizing that and making it a priority, they don't have to do a hell of a lot. They have to make that clear and then just enable the best possible conditions, and entrepreneurs and teams will do the rest. And then they have to just get out of the way and let it happen. Of course, you need, thoughtful regulation so that, things don't go completely nuts. But, with basically some well thought out preconditions and laws around things like stock options, you can go a long way.
Constantijn, do you agree with that? Like, just set the scene and let the startups and other players do the work. Like in general, like maybe additional question that, like, Constantijn, how do you see what should be the role of governments, especially the funding perspective for technology and startups?
I agree. But it does depend a bit on where you are in the maturity cycle. So if you, in the early phase, you as a government, you want to maybe put more public money into the venture capital system, attracting foreign funds, maybe even doing direct investments, but then going to co-investments, make sure that your venture capital system starts to grow. And we still see that, for instance, also in the country, the Netherlands, that the tickets are relatively small. And that the system's still maturing. So there, the government can still do stuff that is more interventionist, but then eventually you have to pull out. It's a sign of maturity when you have less public money in the system. And then I fully agree. It means not getting in the way. This is difficult though. If you look, for instance, at the whole developments around blockchain and crypto. Governments need to kind of grapple with this new phenomenon, and often, and we've seen that obviously with Uber and the sharing economy, the gig economy, that the existing set of rules are no longer really fitting, and it is really up to government there to determine their position. Are they going to stop this innovation from happening? Are they going to help the legacy providers in their position, or are they going to stand back a bit and see how this development pans out, and then are a bit more modest and humble in terms of intervening? And there I'm completely at the same line as Neil. I hope that they are a bit more humble in the sense that you have to kind of see how this kind of peters out. And once you start seeing where the traction is, then yes, then government has a role again, and you might want to regulate some stuff. But on the whole, I would urge governments to be more focused on looking forward than protecting looking backwards.
Got it. There has been a lot of discussion around Europe versus US versus China. And Neil, you have been investing both to the US and at Europe at Index. I want to hear your view on Europe versus China versus US. Who will win and why? Maybe Neil, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think it's too early to call that race. But I could tell you that I believe that the winner will be the most open. Open to ideas, open to capital, and open to markets. And you can't really have that without rule of law and respect for human rights. I wish that all three major economies you've talked about were equal, but they're not. Just as the US is now going through a cycle where it's closing in on itself, I think that benefits Europe. But there are parts of Europe that are doing that as well. And I don't think they'll participate in this to the extent that others will. China, is a formidable competitor, but I don't see it attracting the greatest talent from all over the world unless it opens up and starts trusting its own people, so that the people can trust the leaders. So I think that all three places have a real shot, but it's not just about startups and innovation here. The framework for the entire economy and civil society there matters a lot.
Constantijn, what do you think?
I mean, I can only applaud what Neil's saying. I think there are currently, Europe has to be careful not to fall between two systems, where you have the US, which is really market driven, and you have the which is good because you have market forces working, and then you have China, where it's very state controlled, which also works because you have a top down kind of. But we don't want to be stuck between bottom up and top down by having very strict regulation on one side and not really allowing entrepreneurs to grow on the other. So we do have to find the balance between the two. And I think it's absolutely possible. We've seen that now in countries that have a long history of social justice and equality, like in the main Scandinavian countries, but also in the Netherlands. Again, I think we have a very strong social support system, which can actually easily stand side by side by very innovative startup and tech scene, and the government does arbitrate between those two. And I think we do sometimes see that the two are put in opposite of each other. That high growth is seen as something which undermines the civil society, and I think those two actually go in hand, and we have to be careful, I think, and in Europe, but anywhere, that the tech scene and the tech sector doesn't become a white male dominated sector, but that it is inclusive and that we create many more chances for all talent. And then we come back to the openness that Neil was talking about. It's talent in your society, and it's talent from the outside. All of that is welcome to produce these incredible companies, and I think that's to the benefit of our all. And it's not just the economy; it's society as a whole.
That's a great answer. We're closing to almost 20 minutes, so I want to end this with two kind of like rapid fire questions with rapid answers, obviously. So let's start with what kind of one message, obviously we have discussed this already a lot, but what one message you would like to say, especially to the European level policymakers, both on EU and governmental level, maybe starting with you, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think the good news is you don't have to do a lot, but you do have to decide that this is a priority and then follow best practice. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And things like Not Optional are helping you do that by highlighting what is best practice.
Constantijn?
I'd advise them to listen to the advice of Neil.
Okay, so final question. This event is all about discussing how to make Europe the most entrepreneurial continent. So the question is, can we make it happen? What do you think?
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Constantijn and Neil, for a nice discussion. And we're going to jump really shortly to the next question, next discussion about data and what we can learn about it in terms of this topic. Thank you, Neil and Constantijn, and everybody who was listening.